Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Deuteronomy chapter 34 in a clear and simple way, step by step. So before we jump in, let's just quickly go over our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the brief context hook to see exactly where we are in the story. Then we'll head up Mount Nebo for the vision, followed by the actual death of Moses. After that, we'll look at Joshua and Moses' enduring legacy. We'll wrap things up by breaking down the key ideas and finally, drawing out some powerful practical life lessons. Let's get right to it. All right, part 1, hook and brief context. To really understand this chapter, we have to picture exactly where we are in the narrative. Try to visualize this. The Israelites are all camped together in this massive, sprawling assembly. They have just completed an absolutely exhausting 40-year journey through the wilderness. And right now, they're pausing. They're collectively catching their breath before the final, ultimate transition of their generation. It's a hugely pivotal moment. Now, the text gives us a very specific location. It tells us they're in the plains of Moab. If we look at the Peshat, which is the simple, literal meaning of the text, this is the exact physical staging ground for the Israelites. If you were standing there looking across the landscape, you'd see the Jordan River right in front of you, and literally right on the other side of that river is the city of Jericho. You can almost feel the anticipation and the tension in the air as they stand on the brink of entering the Promised Land. Moving on to part 2, Mount Nebo and the vision. Let's walk through verses 1 through 4. So Moses ascends Mount Nebo, and God grants him this sweeping, supernatural, geographic vision of the Promised Land. And what's amazing here is that he doesn't just get some vague, distant glimpse. God gives him a complete, step-by-step panoramic tour of the entire land. The text walks us through it geographically, starting from the eastern highlands of Gilead, stretching all the way up to Dan in the far north. Then the vision sweeps across the territory of Naphtali, through the central hills of Ephraim and Manasseh, down into Judah, and extending all the way out to the western sea, which is the Mediterranean. Finally, the vision pans south, taking in the dry desert of the Negev and the beautiful valley of Jericho, known as the City of Palms, stretching all the way down to Zor. Moses is literally seeing the complete physical fulfillment of God's promise with his own eyes. And then, in verse 4, we hear God's direct decree to Moses. It's incredibly bittersweet. The text says, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Just think about that for a second. It's a moment of immense, profound closure. Moses' grueling 40-year mission is an absolute success. He did exactly what he was called to do, even though his own physical journey ends right here, on this side of the Jordan River. This brings us to part 3, the death of Moses. We are now looking at verses 5 through 8. Verse 6 tells us about his burial. It says he was buried in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor. Now, Beth Peor means the house of Peor, which was a local pagan deity. But the text explicitly states something absolutely fascinating. To this day, no one knows where his grave is. Think about the immense significance of that detail. Moses is arguably the greatest leader in their entire history, yet he has no physical monument. There's no grand shrine that people can go visit or turn into a place of worship. The literal text points to a quiet, completely divine burial. It keeps the focus entirely on God, rather than glorifying a human gravesite. Then verse 7 drops a remarkable fact on us. It tells us that Moses was exactly 120 years old when he died. But not only that, his eyes were not weak and his strength was not gone. This is actually where that famous Jewish blessing, "May you live to 120, comes from. It's such a powerful detail. Moses didn't slowly fade away from illness or the typical frailties of old age. Up until the very moment God called him, he possessed absolute mental clarity and full physical vitality. It was simply, divinely, his time to go. Following his passing, verse 8 details a very specific period of mourning. It says the Israelites wept and mourned for Moses on the plains of Moab for 30 days. This wasn't just a brief pause to feel sad. It was a deeply structured 30-day period of solemn national grief. This entire community, the same community that had constantly challenged and argued with him over the past 4 decades, now fully, deeply recognizes the monumental loss of their guide. They are honoring him properly before the days of sadness come to an end, and they can move forward into their future. Now we transition into part 4, Joshua and Moses' legacy, covering verses 9 through 12. So as we look at this text, notice the very clear contrast between Joshua's necessary new leadership and Moses' completely unparalleled relationship with God. Verse 9 tells us that Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom. But why? Strictly because Moses had laid his hands on him. And because of this formal transfer of authority, the Israelites listened to Joshua and obeyed the commands the Lord had given Moses. Joshua is clearly a highly capable, spirit-filled commander who is perfectly suited for the military conquest that lies ahead. But make no mistake, he is operating entirely on the foundation that Moses built. Then, verse 10 makes this incredible declaration. It says, "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." This right here is the ultimate distinction. Other prophets in the Bible receive their messages through obscure visions or complex dreams. But Moses had direct, unfiltered personal communication with the Creator, a face-to-face relationship that has literally never been duplicated in the history of Israel. All right, let's move to part 5, key ideas and explanations. Let's distill all of this down. Let's really break down the 3 distinct components of Moses' greatness, exactly as they are listed in the final verses of this chapter. First, as we just discussed, there's his unmatched face-to-face connection with God. That's number 1. Second, the text highlights the miraculous signs and wonders he was sent to do in Egypt, specifically to Pharaoh, to all his officials, and to his whole land. And third, it mentions the mighty power and awesome deeds Moses performed openly in the sight of all Israel. So Moses' legacy isn't some abstract philosophical concept. It is deeply rooted in undeniable public historical events that an entire nation witnessed with their own eyes. And finally, part 6, recap and life lessons. How does this ancient text apply to us today? We can draw 3 highly practical life lessons strictly from Moses' final actions here on the mountain. Step 1. Accepting unfinished work. Moses had to come to terms with the very difficult reality that he wouldn't actually cross the finish line into Canaan himself. Yet he still led his people right up to the edge with absolute excellence. We too, in our own lives, must sometimes accept that our role is to lay a foundation that others will build upon, and that's perfectly okay. Step 2, preparing the next generation. Moses didn't let his ego get in the way, and he didn't leave a power vacuum. He laid his hands on Joshua, ensuring a smooth, stable transition for the safety and success of the entire community. And step 3, remaining faithful to the very end. Think about it. Even at 120 years old, with his physical strength fully intact, Moses' very final act on earth was to obediently climb Mount Nebo, exactly as God instructed. He remained a faithful servant right up to his very last breath. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.